landscape photography world, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. Before we get into the show, I'd like to remind you that the inaugural Landscape Photography World Awards is now open for entries. Early bird entry is available now at a discounted fee until September 30, 2022. Head to landscapephotographyworldawards.com to find out all the details and how to enter. There's some amazing prizes to be won, and I'll be publishing a book and a calendar with the top images from the competition, so there's plenty to look forward to. Entries close on November 30, so there's plenty of time to get your entry sorted, but don't leave it until the last minute. I'd also like to thank the judges who have agreed to work with me and be a big part of the awards. Deb Clark, Victoria Hark, Kieran Stone and William Patino. I certainly couldn't make this competition a reality without their support. Anyway, on with the show. This time I'll be talking to Greg Whitton. Greg is an award-winning landscape and adventure and travel photographer, specialising in outdoor and mountain imagery from across the UK and beyond. In 2015, he was awarded the Light of the Land category win and the overall win to become Outdoor Photographer of the Year 2014. In 2016, he won the Live the Adventure category of the same competition. In 2015, Greg released his first quality photo book through Triplekite Publishing entitled Mountainscape. Greg has lengthy experience in organising workshops and photo walks in the UK throughout the year. His general style is relaxed, with an emphasis on ensuring clients enjoy their day as far as possible, experiencing the outdoors as much as improving their photographic technique in challenging environments. As a long-time and very experienced hillwalker, Greg has, over many years, organised and led groups of upwards of 40 people on long day walks, multi-day and week-long holidays. We talk about his early history with photography, how a recent accident has changed his life and philosophy, the future of photography, and the challenges facing photographers, and a whole lot more. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi Greg, welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me, Grant.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for taking the time. Let's start with who you are and why you do what you do.
Okay. Well, I'm Greg Whitton. I'm a landscape photographer from the UK. And that's I am what it says on the tin. Basically, I shoot landscapes. More as you could say it's at the moment it's as a living, but more on a sort of semi-professional basis as opposed to professional.
So how'd you get started, and how'd you get started with photography in general? But what drew you to landscapes?
Okay, how much time have you got?
We've got all the time in the world. As long as I've got space on my hard disk, it's fine.
Yeah, it's all good. So, I guess I came to it like probably a lot of hobbyist photographers. I probably had my first camera probably when I was around 10 years old. Mm-hmm. Which was a Kodak 110 format camera. So, I enjoyed taking photos as a child. And then in my early 20s, I got myself a film SLR camera, which I enjoyed, but I wasn't really, I was still taking snaps. I'd call them snaps. I wasn't doing any processing of the film or anything like that. It was just take it to the camera shop, get the film developed, see what came out the other end. And that probably went on for a couple of years. And then I completely lost interest in it shortly thereafter. And we're probably talking around the end of the 90s there. And just through circumstance, in the mid-noughties, I started getting into hill walking with a bunch of friends. I was going to Snowdonia and the Lake District a lot. I joined a walking group. I was walking in the Peak District every weekend, and I just enjoyed the landscape and taking photos. And I just had a little digital compact camera, and I started playing around with Picasa, if you remember Picasa. Which wasn't a particularly great editing tool, but it served a purpose. So I would say I did some very artistic processing with that, but it piqued an interest. And towards the end of around 2009, a friend in the walking group was heavily into photography. He still is, and he's one of these guys who would, get up at 3 a.m. because he'd seen the forecast for a great sunrise and hot-foot it across the country to be on top of the mountain for sunrise, and then phone in sick when he was at the top, that kind of thing. But he was upgrading his camera. He had a Canon 40D. And he offered it to me for next to nothing, really. So I bought that off him, and the rest is kind of history there. That was the first sort of serious piece of kit, and digital processing was becoming easier from the point of view of accessibility. The tools were quite powerful. You didn't need an exceptionally powerful computer or anything, and I just got into it through that, which is about the same time as Lightroom dropped as well. So I started to really get into my processing with Lightroom, and it just developed from there. And then the hill walking effectively gave way to walking with the purpose of taking photographs as opposed to just enjoying the outdoors. But yeah, that's why the focus, I guess, on the landscape. I was enjoying taking photos to show people, loved ones, whoever wanted to see them. So some of the places that I was going, and some of the things that I was seeing.
Cool. So how did that sort of transpire that it then started to become semi-professional, or in any way professional?
I'd say that for a good 5 years, I was just getting more and more involved with photography and with the photography community in the UK that was really active on Twitter at the time. So there was a lot of sharing of images. There was a lot of discussions. It was actually quite a rich time for photography in the UK, I think, landscape photography I'm talking about. In terms of social media and the impact of social media. So yeah, I'd say that over that period of time, that 5 years, my photography came on leaps and bounds just through sharing and critiquing and making friends and meeting up with people to go on shoots and things like that. And then, I think as a hobbyist, you always most people would harbor a desire to somehow earn something from their pastime on the side. So that there's the whole thing around entering competitions, and you see people offering workshops, and then you see people offering work. You develop to a point where you see people offering workshops whose photography matches yours effectively, or in some cases you consider that you're able to create better images or whatever. And so those types of things start entering your mind of I could potentially start offering workshops, etc. And at around that time is when I also decided that I would go on a workshop with Alex Nail. who is a very well-known photographer here in the UK. And he was going to Iceland, and I kind of found I'd seen a lot of images from Iceland, and he was going to do a hiking trail, very famous hiking trail in Iceland as a photography trip, backpacking with tents and everything. So I went on that with him, with a couple of other guys, and had a great time. And on the very last night, he put us in a great spot where I got an image which effectively transformed my approach to how I look at photography and potentially earn from it.
Right.
So that kick-started everything towards becoming a semi-professional stroke professional photographer.
So was that where you sort of started to see your artistic approach sort of transcend from just the and I'm not saying you were taking snapshots before then, but I guess taking a photo that was a fairly good representation of the scene in front of you to something that you considered to be artistic, or was that something that was creeping into your photography before then?
It was starting to creep in, or at least I was thinking about it. I tend to think about the types of images that I want to create way in advance of actually creating them. Mm-hmm. So I was having been involved in that social circle and being influenced by others, and in a good way. I started to take an interest in photographers who I'd kind of known about but never really studied. The likes of Joe Cornish, for example, is an obvious one. David Ward, I really enjoyed his approach to landscape photography, and I started to think that I wanted to begin creating images that were equal in their composition, in their vision of what those guys were capable of doing and putting out there and had been doing for 20, 30 years. So that started to shape how I approached taking a photograph. From just a snapshot, which might have been a pretty snapshot with some epic light or whatever. Sure. Moving from that sort of grand vista towards a more intimate approach to landscape photography.
So you're finding that's what's motivating you, and that's more what you're chasing now in your photography, that more intimate scene than the grand vista sort of shot. And how do you see that, I guess, in terms of the evolution of where you started to where you are now?
For reasons beyond my control, I've kind of come full circle in a way. So for a good 3 or 4 years, I literally concentrated on one type of format, which was a 5:4 portrait approach to photography. One lens sat on my camera and didn't move for a couple of years, basically. But that really made me focus on that type of image that I wanted to create. Until it became second nature. And I enjoy visiting what you would call honeypot locations, and getting images that you could consider honeypot type shots, vistas. But I would always try and bring something sort of new or unseen to it. So I'd always been looking for something that was a little different to the standard fare that you would that you would see from those locations. And then, you know, it gets to a point, I think, if you're a photographer, that you only see in photographs. You know, you can be wherever you. It annoys my wife. It really does. But when, you know, we'll be out in the car or we're out for a walk or whatever, and I'm just constantly looking at compositions as I'm walking along. Yep. So, you know, just that whole thought process that you go through when you try and create a photograph or a composition in a photograph, basically just takes over your life. I only see in photographs. So yeah,
I know the feeling.
So and it would, well, it annoys my wife because she'll be like, you know, we're out for a day or whatever, and she's wanting me to take a photo of something, and I'm like, well, that's not a good photograph, so I won't take it. But she's just looking for a memory. Yeah. But I'm just like, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's unbalanced. Anything in that corner, it's just not going to work. So, you know, she's like, oh, just take a photo. Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, it did in that period sort of change my focus away from those just the vistas. And then I had an accident in mid 2019, which has meant to date that I've not really been able to get into the landscape that I want to shoot. So I've had to revert back to a more distanced approach to photography using a much longer lens, and that has naturally gravitated back towards some kind of vista, but with a, you know, I think with a more personal touch.
Yeah,
that's the best way I can describe it. Mm-hmm.
I guess I was going to ask how you would describe your style, and, you know, first off, do you feel that you have your own style, or are you still searching for that? And I guess how do you see that developing over time, and how do you see how it has developed from where you sort of started to, I guess, make that artistic leap from just experiences to making art to where you are now?
I wouldn't say I've got a style that is certainly not a unique style, but I think people who are aware of my photography, if they see a photo that's mine, they will almost certainly recognize it as one of mine. Yeah. Oh, that looks like a Greg shot, you know. Yep. So from that point of view, you know, I guess there is a style there. It comes from how I compose in part, but it also comes from how I process as well. So it does lead you down a typical a certain style, as it were, that does become recognizable.
How do you feel that's developed from where you sort of first started out? I mean, most people start out imitating someone else, or they, you know, you mentioned a couple of names there before, and I know you're not necessarily trying to replicate that exact shot, but, you know, some of those stylistic elements end up contributing to your own style. How do you feel that's developed over time?
Quite considerably, I'd say. Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are certain photographers who have really influenced my images. Would I say that I tried to copycat them? No, definitely not. I certainly don't look for copycat compositions. So, you know, you see, I've got one or two in my portfolio, but you know, if you see a photograph from somewhere, you're like, oh, I've got to get a shot of that, you know, and so you travel and get that exact shot, you know, because somebody famous took it or something. You want your own version. That is not
the iconic shots are right.
Yeah,
and, you know, copying.
Yeah, and they're
a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with it. It's just something that I don't look to do. Like I say, I've got one or two where I've actually looked at the original shot from somebody particularly famous who, you know, it could be one of their most well-known shots, and I'll try and pick it apart and improve it. So that will be my aim if I go to that location. It's not to create a copycat shot. It's actually to improve what they saw in some way, shape, or form. Whether I've been successful at that is another matter. But I try to look for errors in photographs that I've taken or other people have taken, and if I'm there to take something similar, then I'll try and remove those errors effectively. Errors is probably is probably the wrong word, but distractions or things which unbalance the image, doesn't quite work, then I'll try and improve upon that.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I have been influenced by one or two, and certainly my photography would evidence that.
Yeah. Okay. I noticed that you put a lot of emphasis on the environment in your work, and there's quite a lot of, I guess that it's hard to sort of describe, I guess, but that crossover between what some people call nature photography and landscape photography. So where I'm talking about nature is where you're sort of getting into those more intimate pieces, where it might be, the bark on a particular tree as opposed to a group of trees, So in terms of that emphasis on the environment, how important is the environment to you and expressing that as part of your work?
I think for anybody at this point in time in the human timeline, the environment's very interesting. So I try to consider my photography in relation to the environment, and I'm not like I wouldn't say I'm like the friend who would get up at 3 a.m. and go halfway across the country just to take one photo, So I tend to do my photography in bursts, if it'll be a week away somewhere. So there has to be the haul of images that I need to take away from a trip has to justify the environmental impact of it, as far as I'm concerned. Be that the fuel used to get there, fossil fuels or whatever, carbon footprint, but also my impact on the environment when I'm there as well. Leave no trace and things like that. So from that point of view, then I certainly do consider the environment. I also try to eliminate any evidence of obvious human impact on the environment in my images. So I'm not exclusively, but I, and some of my friends don't understand this, but I don't like buildings really in my images. I don't like fences. I don't like lampposts or footpaths really. I like it to be, I like to present the landscape as it would be if humans had never been there.
I get it.
So sometimes you can't do that. So you do have to, focus down on the smaller details, the bark on a tree or whatever. It's just picking out stuff that's interesting and doesn't have that human fingerprint on it.
Yeah, got it. I'd like to talk a little bit about you. You said you are semi-professional. Does that mean that you've got another job, or how does photography fit into your lifestyle, I guess? And do you revolve your lifestyle around photography, or is it the other way around and you fit it in when you can?
It's the other way around at the minute. It's fit it in when I can. Yeah, so for quite a few years, I was basically offering workshops weekends. So I had a full-time job, and then the weekends I'd be going off to Snowdonia or whatever, or I'd take a week off and run a week-long workshop or something like that. So that was using that my holiday. So I, turn that as semi-professional. I've got a full-time job which pays the bills, and then this is something on the side. And then after I had my accident, I couldn't really run workshops. Not the types of workshops that I like to run. I mean, I could have done a workshop in a Tesco car park, but it wouldn't be me. I know some people do, but
I don't.
So I knocked that on. No. So I basically knocked the workshops on the head, and I've looked at other forms of income. So I've written articles for magazines, and I've sold the odd print here and there. So typical ways a hobbyist photographer would make money from their photos. And then I lost my job at the end of last year. So for the last 8 months, I've been jobless, and that's by design. I decided that I was, had a decent payout from the job. Now was a good time to concentrate on the photography, and it started well. I went on quite a few trips to increase my portfolio, and I've been doing some stuff on the digital side of things. But I've also, my wife's also had an incident as well, so she's had an operation. I've been looking after her, and I actually haven't taken a photo since February. So what are we in now? We're in July. Yeah. So I haven't actually taken. I'm a professional photographer in inverted commas, but I haven't taken a photo for 6 months. But that's not unusual for me, actually. I go through occasional periods, as a lot of people do, where photography just takes a back seat, and there are other things to. Life takes over, as it were. I'd love to be out there taking photographs all the time, but
wouldn't we all?
Yeah, but I think a break like this, a big break, and I've done it when I've been seriously into photography. I've just stopped and gone away. And I mentioned earlier about I think about photographs I want to take and how I want to take them, and I find this is a good time to do that. I'll look over my portfolio, look at ways I can have improved images, and really sort of think about that almost constantly, so that when I do eventually pick up the camera again and I go out, I haven't lost my eye, as it were, an eye for the photograph. And when I'm going to take that photo, I'm considering all those things that I've been thinking about for months. So that the image that I come out with is the best that I could do at that particular time.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of, I guess, keeping your personal brand awareness going during that, the last 6 months, how have you gone about that? Are you just reaching back into the archive and posting on social media occasionally, or are you doing other things, or you're doing nothing? Which is fine. I'm just interested. It's interesting.
Yeah. But you basically just described my last 6 months going through the archive, finding hidden gems, posting occasionally. I mean, I've been really heavily into the digital side of things, and Web3 and stuff. So my traditional market, as I would call it, has kind of ebbed away, and I could see that happening way before I started doing anything with blockchain and NFTs and things. So when that came along, it was like a fresh start. But a lot of the people who supported me in the past still follow me on social media, will still comment on stuff. You just don't see it as much. That traditional set of people who are just in it to share and talk about photography and do the odd workshop and stuff, kind of like drifted away. And I'm trying to adapt going forward in this new era, as it were. But it's definitely changed in that time, and part of that is down to me, and part of it isn't. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So what's I guess your part of the world like, and for those that don't know, you living sort of in the middle of Britain, from what I glean. Do you have a favourite spot nearby, and how much is where you live right now influenced how you shoot, or are you more about getting out to, as you said, places like Snowdonia and the Peak District and Lake District, and getting out and about to those more honeypot locations than photographing locally around your area?
Yeah, the latter, basically. So the landscape around here does not inspire me. Is the best way I can put it. I grew up as a kid being taken to the mountains by my parents. I got into photography through hill walking, walking in the mountains and stuff. So that environment is what stimulates me and stimulates my creativity. The environment around me is not in the least bit interesting. Personally, that's not to say there aren't interesting pockets. So we moved to our present location just under a year ago from Solihull, which is Birmingham. Not very far away from here, but again, not a great location. But needs must. So I, just walking the dog, I would go to the same woodland, and I started to notice trees and things. So my, I was talking earlier about how my photography has changed. I've changed from sort of taking shots of mountains to taking woodland photography, and quite predominantly in recent years. And that has just come about from just being forced, with the pandemic and everything going on as well, being forced to look close to home. And there was some nice woodland where I used to live. So I ended up doing a lot of photography there. However, since we've moved to where we currently live, although there's some nice dog walks, they are even from a woodland point of view, they are not inspiring. It's new woodland. It's only been there like 10 years. There's no ancient forest or anything like that.
Oak trees.
Exactly. And although we're on the edge of the Cotswolds, where there are a lot of old woodlands, a lot of them are private land.
Yeah.
So you can't get onto them. They're owned by the likes of Tom Cruise and all these people who have big estates. Unlike the Peak District or the Lake or Snowdonia, where you've got open access land, the Cotswolds aren't like that. So that's partly why I haven't taken a photograph for 6 months, because I've not really been away, or not been able to go away, and the landscape around here doesn't really inspire me. Having said that, we seem to get absolutely amazing sunsets here for some reason, and I keep on missing them. I look out the window and I'm like, oh, that would have been really nice if I just knew where to go. But because I haven't been looking from a photographic eye point of view, I just haven't got a clue where to go around here. So it's best to just go, oh, it's a nice sunset, and forget about it.
So what's your most memorable photography experience, good or bad?
yeah, I don't know. I've had a lot. I mean, the trip I mentioned earlier with Alex Nail culminated in the most amazing scene, which lasted for all of a minute or so, and that's etched out in my memory. There's been a trip with sled dogs in the Arctic, which I got a couple of decent images from, but that whole experience sits in my memory. It's photographing Lofoten, or with a bunch of friends, or visiting Iceland in winter with my wife led to some nice images. So, there's been lots of sort of individual trips here and there, individual moments. I wouldn't say that there's any which particularly stand out from any other, but there's a lot of equal memories is the best way I can put it.
No, that's fine. Any horror stories?
There's always a horror story, isn't there? There's always something that goes wrong. There's always every single trip out, there's always something that goes wrong in some way, shape, or form. The worst one is where I basically I had an accident out on the hill in 2019, which necessitated a trip to a hospital and an operation, and it's one that I haven't quite fully recovered from. It's had a negative impact on other aspects of my life. So that's probably the worst one. And I was out that day taking photographs, and the worst thing is I didn't even get a decent photograph, which would have softened the blow. Months later, when I finally downloaded the SD, had the courage to download the SD card, I was extremely disappointed with the results. So I was like, oh well, not only did I have a crap day, which ended up in hospital, but also yes, exactly, not even a decent photograph to show for it.
You mentioned that you like to plan your shoots. I guess what does that entail? And you're sort of conceptualizing the image well before you get there. So that sounds to me like you go into the field with a concept of what it is that you're looking for. How does getting into the field change that? Because best laid plans and all that sort of thing. I know I've gone out with the intent of capturing, shot X of scene Y and come back with something that looks more like ABC.
Yeah. A lot of the time, I don't set out on a trip. So say I'm in Snowdonia, for example. Now I know Snowdonia like the back of my hand, because I've been going there for many years, and I went there as a hill walker. And I've developed skills as a hill walker that I wouldn't necessarily have developed if I'd just been there for photography from the outset. So reading the weather, understanding how the mountains affect the weather and affect the light and all of those kinds of things. A lot of the standard stuff that you hear from dedicated mountain photographers. So if I don't think that the conditions are going to be right for an image, I won't bother. I won't bother going up the mountain. And you can read that in weather forecasts and all sorts of stuff. So I've got a good idea when I set off whether the type of image that I'm looking for I'm likely to get. Now, I can't control the weather and certain things, I can't control where the cloud's going to be and whether the light's going to turn up. So there is a lot of failure in that. because certain images in my head require light, the light to be in the right place. I'll still come away, and I guess this is why a lot of my images don't have that spectacular light in them. That amazing golden side light that you get at the end of the day just doesn't appear because there's a cloud back in the way. So things haven't worked out, but that's I'll still use what other skills and tricks I've got in my bag to try and come up with a compelling image, even if that light doesn't turn up. And I think that's, ultimately a compelling image. It doesn't necessarily rely on light. You hear about, light. Certain photographers and well-known photographers talk about nothing but light. But I don't come from that stable, and I don't believe in it. I figure a compelling image should be a compelling image whether the light turns up or not. Just through your composition and your approach to the story that you're trying to tell within the photograph. If the light turns up, brilliant. But it rarely does. Yeah. And when I look at my portfolio, I'd say maybe less than 10% have got amazing light, or have got rainbows in them or anything like that. A lot of them are very benign conditions, actually, where I tried to come up with something that is of interest without the spectacular going on.
Yeah, fair enough.
To draw the eye away,
Yep. So how many hours would you spend planning a shoot before you set off?
Did you say hours or minutes?
Hours, minutes?
Hours. It's probably more minutes, to be honest. I don't know. I know some guys who, they will study the photographer's ephemeris and Google Maps and plan a shot to the nth degree, and they'll probably take hours doing so. Yep. I do a little bit of that. My favorite tool is an OS map. Yeah. I look for interesting features on an OS map and try to picture in my mind's eye how that'll look in a 3D real environment. I don't use any additional tools for that. I might look at the photographer's ephemeris to see where the sun might be on a particular day in relation to the type of image that I want to get, but that's about as far as it goes. I will also look on Google images to see whether a particular spot where I intend to take a photograph from has interesting aspects in the landscape. Are there interesting rocks at the top of that mountain, or is it just a grassy top? That kind of thing. So I've got a fair idea of what the landscape is going to be like in which I'm standing, and I've got a good idea from the OS map what the terrain in the background is going to look like as well. So when I say, I will only go up when I think the conditions are right. I've kind of got an idea of what my foregrounds are going to be like. I've got an idea of what my background is going to be like, and I've got an idea about what conditions are likely to be overhead before I get out of the car, and I can do that research in the space of about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So when you get in the field, what's your routine look like there? You're obviously, going to hike up the mountain or up the hill and get to where you think you want to be, and then what?
Normally, I'm about 20 minutes behind time on where I want to be, so I'm pushed for time.
Running up the hill, trying to get the light.
Yeah, exactly. And you get there and you realize, oh no, it's not here I want to be. I want to be half a mile over there. Yeah. no, normally normally I'm sweating profusely, not very calm. It's all a panic. But what I tell people on workshops, when I've run them in the past, is when we get to a location, and I always allow a lot more time on workshops because people are always slower than you think they'll be. Is when we get to a spot, it's put your back down, put your tripod down, and just sit down, have a bite to eat, have a drink, and then have a little wander around, and rest, and make sure that you're not in a panic. And look at what, look around you at what looks interesting, what stands out. Plan your shot for when the sun does turn up in half an hour, or think about where you want to place your camera, where you want to place your tripod or whatever, way in advance of when you actually need to do it, rather than just be in a reactive mode. So that's what I actually try to do when I'm out by myself as well. And I'll try and give myself at least 20 minutes, half an hour of just not doing anything, just little wandering around and looking at the view, trying to find interesting foregrounds or whatever, and then wait for something to happen, or not, as the case may be, or look for things to take photos of if the light doesn't turn up, if what you want to happen doesn't happen,
nutting out the plan B.
I mean, I kind of learned, there was one particular memory, and we were talking about memories earlier, where everything went to plan. It was the most awful day of weather. It was absolutely ridiculous, and I was staying up in Scotland with some friends, and I said, I'm going out to I'm going to drive 4 hours from where I am, to go and take a photo from the top of a hill, because I think X is going to happen. Something is going to happen. I've been looking at the weather stuff, and they were like, "You're mad! It's absolutely throwing it down." So, anyway, I did it, and sure enough, I got there. I got up the mountain in plenty of time. It was horrific weather, and then I had to get out my little bivvy bag and sit in this bivvy bag for a while until the weather began to clear, and then I had this amazing landscape, and I was just listening to some tunes. I was there about 2 hours before what was going to happen happened, and what I wasn't doing was I wasn't planning my shots for when the light turned up. I was enjoying myself, and I had plenty of time, but when the light eventually did turn up, it was so spectacular. I've never had like it since, that I was running around like a headless chicken for about 5 minutes, and I didn't come up with anything that was particularly compelling. I got some nice images, but they weren't good images, in that sense of the word. And only in retrospect did I learn that what I should have been doing was planning all of my shots so that when the light did turn up, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I would have been on autopilot to get the images that I want. And that happened like 9-10 years ago. So my approach since then has always been to try and get to a location early, and plan exactly what I want to take and when I want to take it, should conditions arise.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got your shots in the bag, and you've got home. Are you sticking them on the screen immediately and madly going through trying to find the bangers, or are you leaving them on the card for a week or two and letting them gestate while you think about something else, and then you come back to them?
I don't understand anybody who just doesn't begin to process their images within a nanosecond of taking them. I'm normally too excited. There's normally one one or two that I've
No,
got
that
really
you've got.
excited about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really want to process those. Those two don't end up being my favorites typically, because there'll be others that that I will look. I'll come back. I'll do a batch process. Well, not a batch process, but I'll process a batch of them at once.
Sure.
And come away and think, I've got some bangers there, and then you let it stew for a little while, and 2 or 3 weeks later, you'll be just bored with nothing else to do, so you'll go and have a look at the rest of the raw files, and you go, oh, actually, that one looks nicer. That's the one that stands out, and you'll process it, and you'll take more time over the processing, and be a bit more sympathetic or whatever. And it's actually those ones that stand the test of time, rather than those earlier ones. But yeah, I definitely I process straight away. I've started using an iPad Pro and Lightroom Mobile. So I will I'll go away, like if on a week-long trip, I might take, 1,500 raw images, and I'll download all those to the iPad every night, and process it the hell out of everything, and think I've got a really great set. And then I'll come home and do it on the Mac, and do it properly, and not bother processing half of them, because actually in that intervening time, I've decided actually I don't really like that image, so I'm just not going to bother processing it properly. But everything else then gets reprocessed, and eventually come out with a small portfolio of images from that particular trip, but many weeks down the line.
Sure. So on a portfolio image, for example, your average portfolio image, how long would you spend in processing?
Really depends. Anything from between about 30 seconds to an hour.
Okay.
I'd say heavily leaning towards the shorter time frame.
Okay.
I'd say 90% of my portfolio I haven't spent more than 3 or 4 minutes processing.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised at how similar the process is. I should just do a preset, and I could just apply the preset, and then it'll be done. The only thing I'd have to do is clear up the dust spots, maybe. Yeah, all very, very similar. I don't really do. I'm not the type of person who will export into Photoshop and then minutely tweak individual elements and be particularly what's the word, targeted. I wouldn't say I target elements within a photograph for individual processing. So I tend to go for a lot of more of a global processing approach, as opposed to brushes and all this kind of stuff. I'll do a little bit of dodging and burning, but I'm not accurate with it. I actually really thrive on inaccuracy when it comes to processing. I feel if you're too accurate and too focused on individual elements, then it begins to look unnatural.
Interesting.
Yeah. Without showing you an example of how I process, it's really hard to articulate that. But I love the inaccuracy of Lightroom for that very reason, because you end up with, I think, a more organic looking final edited image than you do with more focused tools like Photoshop.
Okay, fascinating. Do you do much printing in your work? Not
as much as I should, maybe. I do print. I've got a fairly decent printer. I've printed for maybe 4 or 5 years, but I will go months without turning that printer on. but I
So you're
do
printing
believe.
yourself. You're not using a service then.
No, I've only ever used a service once, and they did a great job. But it was for a specific a specific requirement that I couldn't fulfill myself. But so yeah, I do. I print myself, and I'm one of these people who doesn't think a photo is finished until it's printed.
Yeah.
Which basically means that most of my portfolio is unfinished because it's really expensive to print, and I don't like wasting ink.
No. Yeah.
So what I prefer to do is let the ink rest there for 6 months, and then for it to have to purge itself, and therefore use probably twice as much, and therefore waste ink.
Fair enough. Well, I guess in terms of that process, what are you? I mean, when you're into it, your ink's been purged, and you're actually using ink for what it's designed for. Are you trying to control sort of how that ends up looking? Is that why you're doing that yourself, or is it more just I guess a branch of what you do and part of the creative process for you?
I think it's controlling the final output is really important, so that if I send my file to printer A, I send the same file to printer B, using the right parameters, the correct parameters, and the same or very similar papers, you would expect the same results. But that's not always the case. No. Yeah, it's not always the case. And, it costs a lot of money to send files to other people to print. Yep. And then you've got to wait a long time for it to turn up, and then it turns up and it's a bit too dark. Because I've made a mistake in the file or something. Yeah. So I prefer to have that ultimate control, so that when it does come off the printer, it's how I understand how my printer prints. I understand how my computer communicates with the printer, and I've got a very good idea of what it will look like on the type of paper that I'm using. Mm-hmm. Before I commit to it, and 9 times out of 10 it's completely wrong, but no, 9 times out of 10 it comes out okay. It's where I want it to be. So yeah, I prefer to have that control.
Okay, so are you? I guess. How much into the colour management are you getting with your printing, or are you kind of leaving that up to the print drivers and on either the computer or the printer to manage that? Yeah,
I've got profiles for individual papers. I colour manage my monitor, but I found that actually, if you leave it up to the printer to figure it out itself, 99% of the time it does a really good job, and
fiddling around with it actually screws it up.
Yeah, it really does. It can really affect it, and so a lot of the time I'll not bother using those profiles. Sure. It depends on the image. It depends on how dark an image it is, how much black is in it, as to whether I'll use the profile or whether I'll just let the print. I'll do a test print on a small piece of paper, and see what the printer makes of it. A lot of the time the printer does a good job. Whether it's 100% accurate is a completely different matter. And I know people there are people out there who really go into the science.
Yeah, that's what I was interested in.
Of the color management and making sure that the brown in the leaves is exactly as it is on the screen. I'm like, life's too short. I'm I'm not selling prints in volume or for such inflated prices that I feel, or in really exclusive galleries that I feel that level of accuracy is time well spent.
Yeah.
If the final image that comes off the printer is within 5%, 10% of what it is on the screen, I'm generally happy. It should look very similar with those percentages. It may not be totally accurate, but like I said, there are other things to do in this world than spend all my time.
I get it.
Working on that.
What's your favourite paper at the moment?
Favorite paper and the paper I prefer to print on are two different things.
Okay.
I would say my favorite paper is, let me just get it right. Well, I use PhotoSpeed papers. PhotoSpeed are really big in the UK. And I really like the Smooth Cotton 300, which is a matte paper. Yep. I don't print on it very often though, because I actually prefer printing on a burrito, purely because it is easier to print on it. The colors are punchy. More often than not, I can just send it to the printer and it'll print off almost perfectly straight away. So where time and interest are paramount, I would just knock it out on a burrito. So, and if I was sending a free print, if I was doing a print swap with somebody, or I had a small print sale, I will probably do it on a burrito because it's going to look good. It's a good heavy paper, and if it's a high value, I'll probably look to do it on a Smooth Cotton. I'll do it on a matte paper.
Have you ever hit a creative wall? And if so, how did you handle it?
Yeah, I would say that the transition that I talked about earlier between taking vista grand landscapes without too much thought in composition to transferring to a more considered approach. I was lost in that period in between for quite a long time, because my more intimate landscapes, I'll call them intimate landscapes, but I'm talking about, strong, big rock in the foreground kind of thing with a nice background. I was struggling how to do that for quite a long time, although I was thinking about it. And because it took a while to transition, I think I lost faith in my ability to do it, to achieve that. And I knew at the same time that I didn't want to take the same sorts of the same photos Joe Cornish had taken or somebody else. I think at some point of that journey, I probably had 6 months where I didn't take a photograph. I think it was coming back from Iceland as well, from that trip with Alex. I didn't take a photograph that was in July. I didn't take another photograph until I think December that year. And that was around that time when I was was thinking about transitioning photography. I just I couldn't connect with the medium while I was going through this thought process. I've done this several times though, had these big blocks of time off, where, as I mentioned earlier, I'm thinking about it, and each time I think I've taken a step forward, but it has taken time for me to get there. And during that time, it's effectively a creative block. I don't want to go out and take photographs. I've got no interest in taking photographs during those periods of time. If I went out and took a photograph, I don't even think I could be creative in my approach to the compositions. I need time for it to connect in my brain before I can then be creative again.
Okay, got it. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing photographers right now?
There's lots. There's lots. Environmental impact is one, with a growing unease of taking large carbon footprint trips just to take photographs. There's the Instagram generation. Everybody's a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
How do you set yourself apart? How do you maintain a uniqueness in one way in this growing world of imagery? The challenge to the art world in terms of moving from a more conventional way of how do I put it? Earning money through art and prints and exhibitions and all that kind of stuff, and this whole new world of digital online. So NFTs are shaking up the art world in different ways. Some people think they're a waste of time. Some people think they're the future. Two different camps, two different mindsets. And I think specifically we've had 40 odd years of using tools which are essentially the same in terms of how they work, tactilely with knobs and all that kind of stuff, using SLRs, and then this moved us towards mirrorless cameras as well. But now you're getting devices which have got multiple lenses in them. They've got instant processing, artificial intelligent processing, which is all pretty shoddy at the minute. But in time, is there a point to lugging around 2-3 kilograms of equipment if I can get pretty much the same result off my phone? But the whole experience of taking a photograph on a phone is completely different to the more considered approach that you're forced to take with more dedicated equipment. And as those phones become more and more powerful, you're going to see more and more people use them in an everyday setting. There's going to be less need for the more specialized equipment. And although there will always be somebody willing to make that stuff, I think it's going to become harder and harder and more exclusive for people to get hold of in time. So, if Canon can't sell enough cameras, they're going to stop making them. If Nick can't, and so yeah, I think that's
I mean, it happened a while back with Minolta, and they moved into making photocopier parts and various other bits and pieces.
It's like, is the new generation of photographers coming through? Are they really going to be that interested in all this, or in all these interchangeable lens type cameras and things?
That's it. You see those guys out there with the vintage film cameras, and developing them in various soups as well as the more traditional chemicals. It's interesting to see. I think from my perspective, the photography creativity won't stop. It's more around, do the tools change? And I can certainly see that, the writings on the wall now with Nikon, saying they're no longer making DSLRs. So, it won't be too long before everything's mirrorless, and therefore that's the only thing on the market, and therefore, other than secondhand, that then becomes, for me, a lot closer to, that more ubiquitous phone device anyway. And, it's hard to see how, as you say, with the software that is going into the phones and the ability for them to talk to the cloud and use software on servers and bring you back an image that's been, artificially intelligence altered, or even partly generated, you end up with a very different photography landscape, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are happening which are going to prove challenging for the traditional world of photography in terms of tech advances. So you're getting just one other thing that actually I do have an interest in as well, but like metaverses, stuff that you may have seen in Ready Player One, the film, a few years ago. But you're seeing game worlds being created that are almost photorealistic now. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that these environments will be photorealistic within 5 or 10 years, and then you're then into an area of questioning whether a photograph was taken in the real world or whether it was in a computer generated.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate the two when they're both photorealistic, as it were? It's going to be increasingly hard. So you'll eventually have photos created that are completely artificial, and you won't be able to tell the difference.
I'm well aware of that. I spent some time developing my Photoshop skills, actually doing screenshot art. So gaming screenshots and then turning them mostly into replicas of photographs, so that you, in an attempt so that you couldn't quite tell, is that a photo or is that a computer?
And I think that's going to become more and more common.
I mean, it was a lot harder. I mean, you're talking about me getting down to a pixel level, fixing jaggies on the edges of image, of an object, which is not something that I'm
too much time.
Well, I did at the time. I did have too much time in my hands, or I liked wasting it in a certain way. Anyway.
Indeed.
Looking back, I guess, to 10-year-old Greg, what advice would you give him with his Kodak Instamatic?
Forget the photography and get a proper career. Follow your dreams, become an astronaut. I think that's actually a really hard question. I'm kind of like one of these people who I'm still deciding what I want to be when I grow up. I'm 40 and I'm 45. Or am I 46? Can't remember. Anyway, one of the two. I mean, I think if it has to be sort of photographic advice, and I was seeing little 10-year-old Greg again, I'd say take a little bit more interest in the history of photography from that point on, and get into the nuts and bolts of creating photographs, not just taking snaps. And I'd probably advise him to take more of an interest as well in the likes of portraiture and other types of photography, not just landscape, because you're going to really struggle to make a living just in landscape.
Product photography, get into that. Well, if I'd spoken to 10-year-old Greg, that would have been 1986. I'd be telling him to get into stock now, because you can, because you can make a good living from it for the next 15 years. That's it. All right. I've really only got one more question for you, and it's for some people the most important question that I ask on the podcast. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Do I like pineapple on pizza? God. This is a divorceable question in our house. My wife likes pineapple on pizza, but it's a goddamn fruit, and fruit does not belong on a pizza, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So no, firmly no.
Very good. Well, it's another one for the nose. So far, it's been fairly even throughout the podcast.
How is it?
I think this is
people who like
episode 54. So
okay,
yeah, it's probably one for one.
It's just weird. It's weird.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, Greg. It's been really great to get to know you. And learn a lot more about how you do what you do. Where can people find your work?
They can find my work at my website seriously needs updating, but they can find it at www.gregwhitton.com. You could also follow me on Twitter at gwhittonphoto. That's actually the two areas where I'm most active. So if anybody wants to have a chat, just find me a DM on Twitter or something like that. Quite happy to answer questions or just chat about all things photography.
All right, brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.